Darren Waller shared a new detail from his final conversation with Mike McDaniel as the head coach of the Miami Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Here on today's episode of Locked On Dolphins, it's been known that the last man, not named Steve Ross, to talk to Mike McDaniel as the head coach of the Miami Dolphins was Darren Waller. Waller recently on a podcast shared a new detail from that conversation, which you can't help but look at and kind of wonder in the different branches of the Dolphins multiverse what things would look like if the Dolphins had chose not to make a change at head coach. Because part of that conversation with Waller and the exit interview that he had with McDaniel before Stephen Ross interrupted it was talking about what the future was going to hold for 2026 and whether or not Darren Waller would be back and what this offense would look like. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Sean Duggan a couple days ago. The defensive coordinator under Jeff Hafley had some comments on Miami's first-round pick cornerback Chris Johnson, and also the nickel question, because this has been a storyline that's kind of been a buzzy one the last couple of days on social media. So we're going to talk about that as well. But we'll start with this quote from Darren Waller, who was on a podcast with DraftKings, and it was with Matt Barnes, and they're talking about the process of finding out that Mike McDaniel's getting dismissed. And you've probably heard parts of this story before where Mike McDaniel has the exit interview with Darren Waller at 9:30, and 10, 15 minutes in, Stephen Ross comes into the meeting room and they chit-chat for a few minutes, and then the conversation kind of falls off, and Darren Waller kind of sees himself out, and then an hour later looks at his phone, and Mike McDaniel's reported publicly that Mike McDaniel's been fired as the head coach of the Dolphins, right? Like, and I know that there was some different opinions on like how that's handled, and I won't pretend to know what the decision-making process and timeline look like for the Dolphins, but I will say the moment that you decide, right, and it generally felt like Miami kind of wanted to get into their GM interview process and kind of get a feel for in a sense of where is Mike McDaniel on all these candidates' radar as far as do they have their own guys that they vehemently feel passionate about as the head coach of the team? Do they see a window to work with Mike McDaniel, right? They kind of got that process started, and then they ultimately make the decision. The moment you make that decision, I think the right thing to do personally is to seek out Mike McDaniel and have that conversation with him, because the longer you avoid it, or if you let him finish his exit interview with Darren Waller, and what happens if the word starts to get around and information travels fast, which is the entire point of the Waller story, right? None of this is news for May 16th. What is news is part of the conversation that McDaniel had with Waller before Stephen Ross came in, and this is a direct quote from Darren Waller on this podcast. He was like, man, I'm excited about next season. We definitely want you back. Talking about he was going to give the keys to Quinn Ewers, bring some people in to compete with him, all these plans that he had, maybe some coaching staff changes, and it hits about 9:40 and Stephen Ross opens the door. This give the keys to Quinn Ewers bit, first of all, it affirms kind of what we thought, that the Tua Tagovailoa era in Miami was over regardless, right? Because they made changes and they moved on from Tua, so much so that they're paying Tua $50-something million to go away this season. But even if Mike McDaniel is back, his intentionality, as per Darren Waller, is that Quinn Ewers, with what he had the final 3 weeks of the season, was enough for him to, quote unquote, be given the keys to the offense. And, maybe they draft somebody, maybe they sign somebody in free agency. That iteration of the multiverse, we'll never know what the details look like, because the Dolphins did ultimately decide to make a change. But as we reflect and as time passes, I don't think it should be lost. With the Tua tenure, it was over. It was over with Mike, and you kind of got that sense throughout that season, as early as like week 3, right? That tough Buffalo game. And, the reporting that comes out with the NFL Network folks talking about how Mike has to kind of call a script around the quarterback and this and that. And, when that kind of stuff starts coming out, you're really in self-preservation mode, especially that early into a season. You're kind of at the point of no return. And this is the affirmation of that for things that we thought and things that caught our attention as we were going through last season. And we're watching this all play out before our eyes. And things aren't passing the sniff test. So if Mike McDaniel's going into exit interviews on Thursday, the week after the regular season ends, and he's talking with a free agent to be in Darren Waller, and he says he wants to bring him back, but he talks about how he's going to give the keys to Quinn Ewers and bring some people in to compete with him, we'll never know what that iteration of the multiverse looks like. Mike McDaniel in 2026 with quarterback X and Quinn Ewers. We will get a chance to judge the on-field product of the Jeff Hafley, Malik Willis combination that we have been given. If it's a successful pairing, then I think you have to feel great about the change. If it's not a successful pairing, then this will be kind of a fun what if, although I do definitively think they did make the right decision for the timeline and the benefit of the organization, and to give yourself the best chance to build a successful build, to have an incumbent head coach who is part of a decision to pay a quarterback that now he wants to get rid of and move on from, while hiring a general manager. It's so messy, right? Like, at some point, are there going to be some players you look back at, or maybe some assistant coaches, whatever else that you look at, and you're like, man, tough sunk cost there to move on? Probably. There will probably be somebody, if not someone's, that we look at in this time next year, and the 2026 season is played out and done. You're like, man, they really went on to be successful outside of Miami. What a bummer. But that's the reality of when you have to make these wholesale changes, is you have to make the wholesale change. You can't make the partial change, because if you make the partial change, you're just kind of feeding the cycle that the Dolphins have been stuck in for a really long time. So put it in your what if multiverse. Quinn Ewers, Mike McDaniel, 2026, alongside quarterback X, whoever that may have been. Whether that was Ty Simpson, whether that was anybody else. I'm trying to think of who the prominent free agent quarterbacks, maybe you get Kyler Murray with Mike McDaniel, although I don't think Kyler Murray's coming here to compete with Quinn Ewers / not be given the keys to the car. And maybe that would have been a bigger conversation, and Miami could have been bigger players in that, especially with Kyler being like a minimum salary player, if that situation declared itself. But we'll never know. Just throw it in your what if basket, along with a lot of the other what ifs. And hopefully these what ifs age gracefully for Miami and not the other way around. The nickel question. Who's playing nickel in this defense? I've seen this conversation a lot. I've seen some people refer to a young name that played some nickel last year. We're going to talk about that on the other side of the break. Make sure you guys stick with us. The 2026 NFL schedule is out, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi's. Schedule release always sparks debate. Who's overrated? Who got a brutal stretch? Which teams are actually playoff contenders? Kalshi lets you trade on those predictions in a live market, from total wins to playoff chances to championship futures. On Kalshi, you could trade real NFL questions like whether a team makes the playoffs or reaches that certain win total, and it's available in all 50 states, so it's easy to jump in and follow along throughout the season. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house, and as the probabilities change, you can buy in and out of your position, trade the draft pick, the game, and more on Kalshi. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON. Get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi. Kalshi. Trade on anything. Who is going to play nickel in the year of 2026? I can tell you who it's not going to be. And it's Jason Marshall Jr. We had a quote from Sean Duggan around Jason Marshall, Some of the guys on the beat have alluded to conversations that they have had earlier this offseason with some of the coaches on the staff talking about Jason Marshall and their beliefs in where he's best suited. They see him as an outside corner. And that's the quote from Sean Duggan from May 13th, a couple days ago, before the Devon Achane extension hit and the schedule dropped, was I see him just more as an outside corner, whether that's the boundary or the field. Kind of depends on what the plan is that week for who we're playing. But I do see Jason Marshall as more of an outside corner. Marshall, of course, gets pushed into in the preseason, in part out of necessity, with Cater Kohu going down and trying to pick up the pieces of what the Kohu implications were, because Kohu was an inside-outside guy. Right? And when they went sub, Kohu obviously has an extensive experience at the NFL level playing as an outside corner or as a slot corner. And it took him some time to expand his comfort to live in the world in which he lives on the outside. But you go back to 2021, so 2022, his rookie season. Well, he played 534 snaps in the slot. It was 647 snaps in the slot in 2023. And it was 453 in 2024, before obviously missing all of this past season. So he's played more than twice as many snaps in his career in the slot as he has at outside corner. That ratio went up significantly in 24 from 23. So that was a player that I think his injury hurts you at outside corner with all the young players that they also had, but then that also hurts you in the nickel, and that spurs Jason Marshall moving inside. Well, the Dolphins have some other options to live in this world now, where they've talked about Chris Johnson, who we'll talk about at the end of the show, as somebody that they see being able to play on the inside. But also some of the other names that are in this room, whether that's Darrell Baker, whether that's Alex Austin, whether that is a safety, whether that's a linebacker like a Kyle Lewis, who is kind of a safety, kind of a linebacker. That's what he did a lot of at Pitt. I think you have some other options, and Chris Johnson and Kyle Lewis, I think, are the two names to really know. So if you want to live in base, if you want to go base 4-3, but you want to have the versatility to get into big nickel, well, Kyle Lewis blurs the lines very much between being a third safety at 6 foot, 220 pounds, and being a will linebacker who's a pace and space chase player, right? And it might be based off of alignment, but the fact that you can't key on Miami's personnel with a player like that, if he lives up to his potential, and I think that is an important note here, because you can't put too much on these guys' plate and just assume it's going to happen for him. But that's what he is capable of being, is, well, maybe they're a big nickel, but maybe they're in 4-3. And maybe if we motion, maybe we're going to invite them to change their coverage structure without having to change personnel. And then there's Chris Johnson. When you do want to match three wide receivers on the field, Chris Johnson could go from being an outside corner to kicking inside and playing in the slot. And then maybe it's Marshall, or maybe it's Juju Brents, or maybe it's Darrell Baker, right? Like, who's that third corner to come in? And they're an outside corner. And that was kind of what Lord have mercy, what year was the Eli Apple year? And let's see, that was 23. Well, that was some of what the Eli Apple experience was like in Miami in 23, right? Is when Eli came in, he'd play outside corner. He played 576 snaps for the Dolphins as an outside corner that year, versus Kohu in 23 played 647 snaps in the slot, but played almost 250 on the outside, right? Like, that kind of kick inside regression, they're almost two different positions. Well, they really are two different positions, but they get treated on the depth chart as two different positions. And one guy just happens to be the number one spot in both positions on the depth chart. So then you need to bring the next outside corner up when you want to go three corners instead of subbing in a nickel. That's valuable versatility, right? Like that's why the versatility conversation is important. But for Jason Marshall, who was a 5th-round pick for the Dolphins in 2025, struggled with some injuries. There was an early season, I think, was it a hamstring? Like he played 243 snaps defensively in 2025. 179 of those came in the slot. 38 of them came as an outside corner. And as far as when those snaps came, he had 2 games against the Jets and against the Bills where he played double-digit snaps on the outside. And then everything else was like in the slot week 1, week 2, then really didn't play week 3, goes down week 3, is banged up. We don't really see him again until midseason, and it's really sparing snaps defensively. There was 6 snaps against the Bills in week 3, 8 snaps against the Ravens in week 9, 18 snaps against the Bills in week 10. Then Juju Brents goes down in week 11, and we see a little bit more of Marshall, and then they had their bye week. It wasn't until Cincinnati, Tampa, New England that you really saw kind of the volume play come back where it's 31, 57, and 25 snaps played in those. But he only played 1 snap as an outside player in those 3 games combined. So Marshall's almost kind of like there's a chance he's a sunk cost player because of the change and the regime change now. But I do think like his physicality at 6 foot, 200 pounds, the fact that he was physical enough that the pass regime thought that he could do some of that stuff, even if it's not where he's best served to play. Kind of like a lotto ticket, right? You get a lot of those. A lot of these late round guys should be considered as lotto tickets, and then it's a matter of which ones hit. But Sean Duggan talked a little bit about Chris Johnson and what they liked about him so much. And I think there's some things there that are informative and reinforce some things that we think that we've thought this offseason about what matters to this Dolphins defense with this regime. We're going to talk about that next on the side of the break. Stick with us. NBA playoffs are here. Every possession matters. If you're looking to get even closer to the action, FanDuel has a great offer to get you started. Right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Turn $5 into $150 just for getting started. I like using FanDuel for the playoffs because everything you need is in one place. You can check stats, trends, matchups before making your picks, which makes the whole experience feel a lot more informed. Whether you're looking at player props or following your favorite stars, it adds another level of excitement to every game. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Have you ever looked at your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? If so, you're not alone. Keeping track of subscriptions, spending, and bills can get overwhelming fast. That's where Rocket Money comes in, helping you take control of your finances all in one place. It tracks all your subscriptions in one spot, helps you cancel the ones you don't need, helps you categorize your spending so you can see where your money's going. You can set budgets, alerts, and stay on top of your bills. It just makes everything feel more organized and gives you a clear picture. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spendings, and lowers your bills. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. This Sean Duggan quote is a good one. Asked about what are some of the things you liked about Chris Johnson in selecting him in the first round of this year's draft? A thank you to whomsoever it was that was in the scrum that asked this question. I really enjoyed the answer from Sean Duggan. The thing that stood out to me the most was the way he plays his game, his play style, which we talk a lot about here. You see corners a lot that can cover and can run and can play man and zone. The thing that really jumped off about him is he embraces contact. He's got heavy hands at the line, and he could tackle. He's a really fun tape to watch. And then his movement skills, he's smooth. He's really smart. When you sit down and talk football with him, he understands the big picture. There's so much to love, but I'd say the thing that jumped out the most was the way he played the game. So when we talk about the physical profile, he's not like an awesome marvel of size, but at 6 foot 193, he's a well put together player, right? He's a well put together corner. So he joins this group of guys like Brents, Baker, Marshall, Johnson, Marco Wilson, Alex Austin, Miles Battle. You can include Storm Duck as a holdover in here. These are all big, physical players. These are all 6 foot, 190, 195 plus. So to get that affirmation, it's a great, as they continue to tool out this cornerback room, and they'll go. Duggan mentioned field boundaries, so right. We'll have to watch this season and see how they use these skill sets. And the field is obviously the wider side, so whatever ball hash mark the ball's put on, that's something to take a note of, because the field is the wider side, which necessitates a certain kind of skill set. And then the boundary is whatever side of the field the hash is on, whether it's a tighter space. What kind of implementation and coverage tendencies do they have there with this group? What are they trying to do? It will be very informative, and knowing that field and boundary is a relevant talking point to go with. Now you've got these skill sets. They mentioned Chris Johnson is smooth. Do they want him as the field player because he's so smooth transitionally? And then if you're, a lot of times you put your passing strength to the field for spacing purposes. Now, teams put formation in the boundary all the time, but it's usually to try to manipulate coverage rules. So it's something to watch. But Jason Marshall, I think, has as good a chance as anybody not named Chris Johnson to seize the other outside cornerback spot. And even if he doesn't, he could be the third. No, I like Juju Brents' film a lot. He's very physically gifted. The reliability has been what has prevented him from living up to his draft status. Darrell Baker is a player who I got a certain level of respect for guys that you just keep trying to replace and they just keep coming back like cockroaches, right? Like you just can't get rid of them. They're always on the field, for better or for worse. And that's not to say Darrell Baker is an all-pro cornerback. We'll see what he does with his opportunities here in Miami. But I've got that guy that keeps bouncing back when it's like, okay, we got a new guy in this year. We want him to start. And it just end up being the guy that you keep trying to replace because he ends up being the better guy anytime you put somebody next to him in the depth chart. I got a lot of respect for guys like that. That might be Darrell Baker. We'll see. But one place that they've told us now publicly, that apparently they've told folks not publicly behind the scenes, is that Jason Marshall will not be an inside corner. He'll be an outside corner. That's going to do it for us here on this Saturday, May 16th edition of Locked On Dolphins. We did the Friday show late on Friday night, obviously for the schedule release. Wanted to get another one. Promised we would get another one to you guys this weekend. So here we are. Box checked. We'll grind some tape. I hope to see you all again soon. Thanks for checking out Locked On Dolphins.